let me come to the year 1957, when the relationship between India and China was on a very even keel. Xu Enlai, when he visited India sometime in early 1957, in fact referred to McMahon Line in the context of the border dispute between China and Burma. Xu told Nehru that though China did not recognize the McMahon Line, uh, it considered it an accomplished fact and therefore they should accept it. Of course, he said it in the context of Burma. So Nehru took that as a clear signal that China would not create a big ruckus about the McMahon Line. Chu at that time did not question India's claims on the western sector, that is in the Ladakh sector, though China at that time was constructing a highway linking Xinjiang and Tibet passing through Aksai Chin. China, of course, regarded Aksai Chin as Chinese territory. So things stood at that in 1958 at this stage. But the same year, an intelligence patrol reported Chinese road building activity near Aksai Chin. The IB immediately suggested that a protest should be lodged. But the officials of the External Affairs Ministry thought that the boundary in this area had not been delimited and hence the protest would not be on firm grounds. The army, on the other hand, took the view that the road was of no strategic importance to India. Besides, they were very clear that they would not be able to eject the Chinese from Aksai Chin. Nehru considered all this and he thought that it would not be feasible to protest without being surer about the actual alignment of the road. So, in June 1958, the government decided to send 2 patrols to verify the actual alignment of the road. The parties came back in October 1958. In fact, one of the parties came back in October 1958 from Aksai Chin, and they confirmed that the road cut through the Indian territory. The other party was in fact intercepted and detained, and Chinese, they sent them later. So accordingly, the Chinese ambassador was given an informal note. The note expressed surprise at China's construction of a road on what was, in India's words, indisputable Indian territory. But the note also said that India was anxious to settle these petty frontier disputes. Mark the word petty. Petty frontier disputes. Although India's claims were, of course, they were insisted upon, Delhi, it was clear, considered Aksai Chin a minor issue and indicated its willingness to deal with it. In reply, of course, Beijing said that road was within Chinese territory. And again, India wrote back and said that the question whether the particular area is in Indian or Chinese territory is a matter in dispute which has to be dealt with separately. The government of India proposed to do so. This meant that the Indian government itself was not very sure about whether Aksai Chin belonged to India or not. There were several exchanges of note, and China in fact revealed its hand only in early 1959. In a note to India, Xu Enlai said for the first time that the entire boundary had never been formally delimited by either a treaty or an agreement. He said that Aksai Chin had always been under Chinese jurisdiction. He added that McMahon Line was a product of the British imperialism and could hardly be called legal. Nevertheless, he said China found it necessary to take a more or less a realistic attitude towards the line, and it also had to act with prudence and needed time. Okay. China did not hold that every portion of Chinese boundary line is drawn on sufficient grounds. But for the first time, Chu Enlai questioned India's maps, particularly its western section. The Chinese note also added that to avoid border incidents, both sides should maintain status quo. This was how things stood in January 1959. China was laying out its claims, though very cautiously. Again, there were exchanges of notes back and forth, back and forth. There was no major alarm until Tibet exploded in 1959. I am not going to dwell on the revolt in Tibet, but there is little doubt that China thought, at least a section of Chinese political circle thought that India actively encouraged the revolt in China. Under the instructions from Mao, People's Daily published an article scathingly attacking the Indian big bourgeoisie using the same usual Marxist jargon. China also said that India's wish was to have Tibet as a buffer between China and India, and India tried every method to realize her wish. In fact, what actually happened was, it was the CIA which was covertly supporting the revolt and with the active help of Pakistan. In fact, CIA operated its plane from the then East Pakistan and nowadays Bangladesh. It is not clear that India was aware of CIA's operations. In all probability, it did. But India chose not to intervene or inform China about the activities of the CIA. China must also have been aware of the role of Pakistan, as Pakistan then was the member of the CENTO-SEATO agreement, But it suited China to accuse India, which it did vigorously. Still, China in 1959 considered Nehru's non-alignment movement genuine, and it avoided personal attacks on Nehru. In fact, the Mao's famous principle of unity and struggle was in display here. Sometimes China was giving leeway to India, and sometimes it was attacking India vigorously. But all in all, in the early part of 1959, it appears that China thought that border war could be avoided, though it did not stop preparing for it. That is very, very important. Dalai Lama was just 21 when he first ran away from Lhasa and came to India in the year 1956. He came to India, but Nehru, for the sake of good India-China relationship, requested him to go back, and he did return to Lhasa. But in 59, he felt that his life would be in danger if he had stayed in Lhasa, and hence he came to India and sought asylum here, which Nehru promptly gave. At this point of time, we don't realize that refugees began to stream in through Tawang, the Brahmaputra Valley, and dozens of other routes into the northeastern frontier, the NIFA, the present-day Arunachal Pradesh, the northeastern frontier agency of that time. So the NIFA administration at that time was very thin. It was overstretched. Assam Rifle, in fact, half of Assam Rifle was in Nagaland at that time, if I remember correctly. When the refugee flow turned into a major humanitarian, administrative and security crisis, the Indian government did not know what to do. It had a great difficulty in dealing with these refugees, because there were Tibetan fighters, and surely there were also Chinese spies among the Tibetans who landed in India. So it was quite difficult for India at that time to manage the refugee crisis. India did manage the crisis. Nehru did not betray Dalai Lama. But on the other hand, Dalai Lama did betray Nehru in 2018, but that's a different story. Now, because of this, the revolt in Tibet and the grant of asylum to Dalai Lama in India, the warmth that existed between India and China slowly started to become cold, and border skirmishes started taking place. One such skirmish was in Langzhou. That was, of course, discussed in the Indian Parliament. Nehru, till that time, did not speak openly about the border disputes, either in Parliament or in public, but he had to concede that there was some problem with China. But even then, Nehru did not dwell upon the McMahon line, and he did say in the Parliament that Aksai Chin was a disputed area. It seems, this was Nehru's thought until such time. Sarvepalli Gopal, that is President Radhakrishnan's son, who was a great historian, he was then the director of he was the director of historical division in the Ministry of External Affairs during that period. He came back from London and showed several documents to Nehru and convinced him that India's claim on Aksai Chin was strong. Till such time, Nehru was also thinking that Aksai Chin was a disputed area. In October 1959, there was another clash which was at Konkala, in fact, which was violent. In fact, India lost about 9 soldiers and 10 were captured. China at that time issued a strong statement that if the Indian troops crossed the boundary claimed by China, the Chinese army would march south of the McMahon line. Then the temperature started increasing, and in November 1959, 100 Congress MPs met Nehru and asked him to take a very strong line against China. Nehru listened to them and told them that such a request would in fact increase the tension and would make an agreement with China very difficult. But the MPs were not satisfied. Slowly but surely, Nehru was being hemmed in by hawks all around. But he was still advising restraint again and again in the Parliament. Now the exchange of notes between India and China, there's a long affair. They kept happening. India, of course, India kept insisting on its position. China kept insisting on its position. And China wanted to meet Indian leaders, and India said, stay away from me, stay away from me. From that attitude, India finally relented, and a meeting took place between Nehru and Zhou Enlai in April 1960. Delhi at that time thought that China would come out with a proposal that China would not make any claim south of the McMahon line, that China would not claim Assam, would not claim Northeast Frontier Province. But in the bargain, India should give up its claim on Aksai Chin. This was a sort of a barter arrangement that India expected China to place on the table. Such a barter, Nehru clearly realized that would not be accepted by the Indian Parliament. In fact, he reputedly said, if I give them that, I shall no longer be the Prime Minister of India. I don't know why he took the stand, but that was what he seemed to have said. But many of his cabinet ministers were also saying that Nehru would be out of office as Prime Minister if Nehru conceded territory. Of course, there were protests all over Delhi at least. The Jan Sangh, they had a no surrender week, and there was a massive demonstration in front of Nehru's residence, and the non-communist parties were all up in arms. To add to Nehru's problems, the Indian Supreme Court in March 1960 pronounced a judgment on India's boundary agreement with Pakistan or Berbari in the then East Pakistan. India transferred some territory to East Pakistan. On that, the Supreme Court gave a judgment. In that judgment, the Supreme Court clearly said that if Indian border had to be changed, it should be done only through a constitutional amendment. This meant that if Nehru had to concede territory to China, he had to seek an approval, two-thirds approval from the Indian Parliament and half of the state legislatures. Nehru, in spite of the fact that he was the most popular leader in India, was not sure that he would be able to convince his own Congress MPs. So his position then was really tenuous. Okay, but still there are some hopes that the talks would make some headway. In fact, Radhakrishnan, the then India's vice president, seemed to have told the British High Commissioner that India would allow China to use Aksai Chin if China conceded that India had a sovereign right over that region. Okay. In fact, Radhakrishnan seemed to have said to the British High Commissioner, McMahon his name, I think. He said the whole idea was a face-saving one. Okay. He in his own language, he said if China yielded the shadow, we will yield the substance. Like a typical Advaiti. This was what he seemed to have told the British High Commissioner. He also seemed to have told him that there may not be any actual agreement, but this would be a sort of an understanding with the Chinese. Eventually, when Chu Enlai came to India, he met several leaders. He met Nehru, of course. He met Krishna Menon, of course, he met separately. He met Morarji Desai. He met Govind Vallabh Pant. He met and again Radhakrishnan. Of course, Pant and Morarji Desai were belligerent and Radhakrishnan was suave, but subtly dismissive. Above all, President Prasad, Rajendra Prasad, repeatedly was writing to Jawaharlal Nehru, exhorting him not to concede to the demands of India. Naturally, the meeting reached nowhere. The only point India gave its consent was on the Chinese proposal on appointing a group of officials on both sides to examine the legal and historical records. The final decision was the report submitted by the teams would then be considered by the Prime Minister. In my view, this was a great opportunity that Nehru lost. He caved in because of pressure from every side except perhaps from the communists. But if he had really made up his mind, he would have found a way to arrive at a solution. At least tacitly accepting that Aksai Chin could be with China, but India would keep making feeble protests. In fact, this would have gone on for many more years, and a war could have been avoided. But Nehru did not do that. Maybe there was a tacit understanding between the two prime ministers, because the border patrolling was perhaps eased, and it was not aggressive for a few more months. In May 1960, the IB reported increased Chinese activity in Ladakh. Okay, so the government in consequence decided to set up additional posts and patrol unoccupied areas. But the troops were strictly enjoined to avoid clashes. The army headquarters, however, refrained from giving firm orders for patrolling. Okay. See, at that time, the reasons for the caution was explained by General L.P. Sen. This is quoted by, I think it is from Srinath Raghavan's book. Let me read what Sen said. Sen wrote that owing to logistical difficulties, additional troops had not been inducted into Ladakh. If patrolling were intensified, the Chinese might react sharply and the army might be unable to counter a large-scale incursion. This was what the Chief of General Staff wrote. Okay. In 1961, the Chief of Staff submitted a paper spelling out the overall requirement of the armed forces. After spelling out those requirements, the chiefs added, should the nature of the war go beyond that of a limited war, and develop into a full-scale conflagration amounting to an invasion of our territory, then it would be beyond the capacity of our forces to prosecute war. That is, then it would be beyond the capacity of our forces to prosecute war. Beyond a short period, because of limitation on size, the paucity of available equipment, and lack of adequate logistical support. So the Indian army was very clear that it was not in a position to even fight a limited war. In fact, I will read what Srinath Raghavan says. He says it very, very succinctly and clearly about the state of thinking, about the way the Indian armed forces thought in the year 1960. As earlier, the military assumed that they would only have to cater for a limited conflict. The question of preparing to counter threats across a spectrum was overlooked. The strategic problem of dealing with territorial incursions was blithely evaded. The chiefs evidently sought to wage the kind of war with which they were most comfortable. Even here, scant thought was given to logistical requirements. The assessment of threats and countermeasures was crude. No effort had been made to forecast likely Chinese troops and logistics buildup. Assuming that they would have to prepare for a limited war, the chiefs projected only a modest increase in resources. This is very important. The chiefs projected only a modest increase in resources. But instead of asking for more, they went on to claim that limited resources were a constraint in waging a higher intensity conflict. Indeed, in implementing even the existing orders. The paper showcased a remarkable lack of strategic judgment on the part of the professional military. This was the position of the Indian armed forces in the year 1960. In September 1961, the IB also submitted a comprehensive paper stating that China would come right up to their claim of 1960 border wherever we are not in occupation. But where even a dozen men of our are present, the Chinese have kept away. What it was saying is that if we keep moving north, up and up, and the Chinese will keep retreating. This was what the IB's paper seemed to say. The IB therefore recommended opening posts in the unoccupied areas of Ladakh and filling gaps along the McMahon line. Okay, the tenor of the paper was that China would not react sharply to these moves. This assumption was dangerous and simplistic, but unfortunately, this became an article of faith in the minds of military as well as civilian officials in Delhi. Okay, strangely, the IB seemed to have said in November that the Chinese would not react to our establishing new posts and they would not use force even if they were in a position to do so. Mark my words, even when China was in a position to use force, they would not actually use it. This was what the IB was telling the Indian government and the Indian army. As Henderson Brook's report points out, this was contrary to army's own intelligence assessment that China would use force if attempts were made to take back territories held by them or claimed by them. This was discussed again and again and again. And finally, the following directive was issued by the government of India. This is the real directive which led to the actual war in October-November 1962. So you listen to me carefully. I'll read the directive, listen to me carefully. This is very, very important. The directive says as follows. So far as Ladakh is concerned, we have to patrol as far forward as possible from our present positions towards the international border. This will be done with a view to establishing our posts. We should prevent the Chinese from advancing any further and also dominating from any post which they may have already established in our territory. This must be done, please read again. This must be done, please listen to me again carefully. This must be done without getting involved in a clash with the Chinese unless this becomes necessary in self-defense. What India said was, you patrol as forward as possible, avoid clashes, okay, and don't allow China from dominating any of the posts they may have already established in what we consider as our territory. Okay. As regards UP, the middle sector and other northern areas, there are not the same difficulties as in Ladakh. We should therefore, as far as practicable, go forward and be in effective occupation of the whole frontier. Where there are any gaps, they must be covered either by patrolling or by posts. See, the C is very, very important. This is what the Indian government's directive was. Without C, A and B are useless. I will come to it later, but you listen to what C says. The class C says, in view of the numerous operational and administrative difficulties, efforts should be made to position major concentrations of forces along our borders in places conveniently situated behind the forward posts from where they could be maintained logistically or from where they can restore a border situation at short notice. What this in effect says is that your forward portion may be thin, but you should be defended stoutly at the rear. This was the direction of the Indian government to the Indian army. The Henderson-Brook report points out that C is crucial. This is what the report says. Without this, there could be no balance in our forces, and any move forward would be at the mercy of the Chinese from the start. Thus, if the government's decisions were to be enforced, it could be done only after the induction of a sizable force. Western Command had indicated a minimum of 1 division was required for the effective defense of Ladakh. Mark my one division. Okay, I will tell you what a division is later. Okay, but Army headquarters in its directive to the command simply omitted the mentioning of the para C, without which the implementation of A and B would be impossible. What the Army headquarters did was, the crucial para C was not communicated to its lower formations, to its command. They communicated A and B, and they did not tell the command that how they are going to maintain a sizable force at the rear. It is clear that the Army headquarters was under the illusion that China's reaction would not be very aggressive and the army would have sufficient time to recover as it happened in the earlier clashes. General Thapar and General Kaul went along with the civilian advocates of this forward policy, though they had some initial reservation. Okay. Actually, the problem was that the military leadership had no other alternatives to offer to the political leadership. There was no professional judgment. They should have come back and told the government that it would be impossible to adopt this forward policy because the army was not in a position to have a strong force to back our forward units should an incursion come about. Okay, now let me tell you about how when I say division or platoon, or you may not understand. Let me tell you how army is organized. Let me tell you that. Army, the lowest unit of army is a section. That's the smallest outfit. smallest military outfit with about 10 or 12 persons. It will be headed by an Havildar. The next is a platoon, which is about 3-4 sections will be there. It will be headed by a JCO. The next comes the company. A company will be 3-4 platoons, and a captain or a major will be heading it. Then comes a battalion, like the Suresh Babu headed in the Galwan region. The battalion, it will have about 4-5 companies will be there in a battalion. It will be headed by a colonel. Then comes a brigade. Above the battalion, the brigade will be headed by a brigadier. Above the brigade is a division. A division is headed by a major general. Above division is a corps. Okay, Indian Army today it has I think 14 corps are there. It has a corps. Above corps is the command. India today have 6 operational command and 1 training command. And division is headed by a major general, and corps is headed by a lieutenant general, and the command is also headed by a senior lieutenant general. So this is it is section, then platoon, then company, battalion, brigade, division, corps, then command. Above the command is the army headquarters. So the instructions given by army headquarters will trickle down right up to the, if need be, right up to the section. Okay, it will come down. This is how army is organized. Indian army is organized. So when I say brigade or command, division, please don't get confused. See, the Indian forward policy was not received well by China. In fact, it sent several notes protesting India's moves, and finally it announced resumption of forward. It has stopped forward patrolling because of the Nehru Chou En-lai, the meeting. It was there was no forward patrolling in Ladakh. It announced the resumption of forward patrolling in Ladakh, and then it warned that it would be extended to the entire frontier. Okay, the India could not match the PLA's, the People Liberation Army's, numerical and logistical superiority. Okay, till 1962 we could establish September 1962, when October the war came about, we could only establish 36 posts in Ladakh, and against China's 47 or 50 posts. It's 47 posts, I think. And they were qualitatively very, very superior. And what was important was that they were sited at heights, at dominating heights. Okay, and we had to perforce, have our posts on valley floors, because our the army supply was dependent on air dropping. So only when the air dropping zone, near the air dropping zones, they had to have the post. That was a difficulty India had in 1962. In 6th May 1962, about 100 odd troops, they came in an assault formation towards an Indian post, in the Chipchap Valley. The Western Commander, Lieutenant General Daulat Singh, he saw the threat immediately, and he wrote to Army headquarters that we should pull back the post. But both the DMO, I think DMO was Palit and Thapar, General Thapar, they felt that if we withdraw like that, it will show a lack of resolve, and the Chinese would adopt similar tactics at other posts, and the entire forward policy would be unraveled. That's what they said, And the Prime Minister also thought that China is doing this to show its force and to test India's resolve. Okay, and he in fact directed that the post, we should stand firm, and it should be the post should be reinforced. He said this was necessary to study the behavior pattern of the Chinese aggression. I think this was Nehru's words, whatever it meant. In the event the Chinese backed off without attacking, this again, this Chinese backing off made the army chief and the CGS, the chief of general staff, to conclude that the incident vindicated their assumptions about China's reactions, and the forward policy could be pursued without much risk. Okay, this was what they thought. By this time, Nehru perhaps got wind of what China had in mind. I am not very sure, but it appears that the Soviet sources had told him that the border games would soon be over and an attack was imminent. So Nehru decided that he should he should offer open negotiations with Beijing without any preconditions. Mind you, this was a major departure from India's stand. The Prime Minister was aware that if this move became public, he would be under tremendous pressure from his own party and the opposition parties. Okay, so but they started the diplomatic channels were on the move, and the charge d'affaires, in Beijing, he called on Zhou Enlai and told him that the government would be prepared to send a ministerial delegation to Beijing without any preconditions to discuss all bilateral problems and disputes. And the Chinese embassy in India was also given a note. In that note, the India, for the first time, the Indian government did not demand any withdrawal forces from Ladakh or China. It only said that the border question could be discussed, and the China should restrain its forces from going beyond China's 1956 claim line, which is capable of easy and quick verification. So India is offering that more or less, no, we would not do anything. Please don't do anything yourself. This was what India, in short, was offering to China, and India wanted the discussion to continue. But Beijing rebuffed India's moves. It was now determined to teach India a lesson. The teaching of a lesson came at the Thagla Ridge. This Thagla Ridge is on the McMahon line. It is north of McMahon line. The PLA occupied the ridge on 8th September. Okay, the ridge was in fact was disputed, as the McMahon line ran south of the ridge, but the Indians were claiming that the boundaries were supposed to be to follow a watershed. Okay, and the Namka Chu River, the McMahon, in fact, if you see the map of Thagla Ridge runs from west to east, and it was overlooking the river, Namka Chu River, which was south of that. The McMahon line, in fact, it ran south of this line, but India claims that we are following a watershed. So any area which is south of Namka Chu should be with India. That was what the claim of India was, and India was having a post at a place called Dola, I think. Dola post was there, which is on south of the river Namka Chu. So the Chinese position at that time, China was occupying Thagla Ridge, which was being claimed by India as its own, created a huge problem for India at that time. Nehru was not in Delhi; he was in London attending the Commonwealth Prime Minister's conference. Krishna Menon, it seems, appeared to have spoken to him on telephone, explaining the situation, and he suggested to play it cool and not give any publicity to the Chinese move. The PM agreed, but somehow the press got wind of what was happening at the boundary, and all hell broke loose. Okay, and the opposition parties were up in arms. The Swandra party, in fact, Rajaji demanded Jawaharlal Nehru's resignation, and Jan Sangh demanded that India issue an ultimatum to China that if you don't vacate our territory, we would declare war against China. That must be, that was what an ultimatum was. That was what an ultimatum is all about. So this was what was happening. The army chief and the Eastern Army Commander Lionel Elpison. Elpison was a great soldier. In fact, if you had heard my Kashmir lecture, you would have realized I mentioned his name then also. He was a very great soldier, and he was commanding the Eastern Army Command at that time. No, he said that he surmised that the PLA's strength near the Dola post was around 600, and if India had a brigade, just opposite that area, okay, then the Chinese could be faced and they could even be evicted. They could be evicted. Okay, but the local commanders, they felt that such an operation is utterly infeasible. The corps commander at that time was General Umrao Singh. He was also a great soldier. He told Lionel Bogison that the PLA could easily outstrip any effort to push Indian troops into the Thagla area. Logistically too, they were in a much superior position, with a roadhead only a few miles short of the Thagla ridge. Okay, so General Umrao Singh recommended pulling the Thagla post south of the map marked in the McMahon line. In fact, we were in fact violating this is very, very important. We were violating the McMahon line, quoting the watershed principle. In fact, McMahon line was south of it, and we are in fact north of the McMahon line, at the banks of the Namkachu river. Okay, and on the other side of the river was the Thagla ridge. Okay, there where the Chinese were occupying. We are claiming that also as our area. Okay, this we should know. No, this is very, very important. So there was a fight between the corps commander and the Western Command, the Eastern Army Commander, Elpison and Umrao Singh. So finally, Elpison asked Umrao Singh to produce an operational plan with utmost speed. In the meanwhile, MEA's China division and the DMO, Brigadier Palit, they tried to assert the PLA's logistical capabilities based on the networks close to the frontier, and they concluded that the infrastructure China possessed was incapable of supporting a full-scale invasion into Indian territory. This was the assessment in September 1962. Meantime, in response to the pressure from General Sen, the division and brigade commanders prepared a plan to dislodge the Chinese from the Thagla ridge. Okay, the plan was it was a make-believe one, and the logistical requirement projected were well beyond what could be built up before the onset of winter. Umrao Singh considered even this plan was too ambitious. Okay, he wanted he called for a division with full artillery and logistical support. Okay, and this was handed over to Sen. Okay, Sen was, of course, he was so angry, and he said he abused the field commander. He said, "You got cold feet," and there was fight between the Western Army commander and the corps commander. And finally, Sen recommended to Army headquarters that Umrao Singh be removed from the 33 Corps. He should be removed from the Corps and he should be replaced. But Thapar also agreed. But somehow a peculiar decision was taken. What was done was Umrao Singh was relieved of the responsibility of NEFA, and a new corps was created. It was 4th Corps was created, and B.M. Kaul was appointed as commander. The corps commander was B.M. Kaul. Okay. You will have, at that time what was decided was you would have no additional troops apart from the two brigades of the fourth division, which was already under the Umrao Singh's corps. That's those two divisions were removed from that and given to General Kaul. So this was a corps, fourth corps, with two brigades. You get my point? Sorry, this was with the two brigades. Okay. Now, Kaul, what he did, as soon as he took charge in Nefa, he wanted to be the hero. Despite strenuous objections from the divisional and brigade commanders, he wanted to send a patrol across the Namka Chu on 9th October. Early morning, as troops were prepared to cross the river, the Chinese attacked and they almost finished off the patrol, almost wiped out the entire patrol. Kaul got cold feet and immediately rushed to the army headquarters that a grave situation had developed and they wanted to fly to Delhi to present his case. Okay, and he instructed General Prasad to hold positions along Namka Chu river. He reached Delhi the following day. The same evening, a meeting was held, chaired by the Prime Minister, Krishna Menon, the IB chief Mullik, the foreign secretary was also there, I think, Thapar, Sen. Kaul presented, Kaul gave a detailed briefing on the situation at Namka Chu. He underscored the numerical superiority of the PLA in the area, the tactical and logistical problems its troops faced, and he came out with everything. Nehru said that it was for the military to make the choice. Thapar and Sen felt that a brigade, that at that time Dalvis brigade was there, 7th brigade. A brigade could hold the existing defensive positions against an enemy division. Okay. See, we need not, what they meant was, you need not attack, but you can defend your territory. You can defend your territory easily should an attack come about. Okay. You need not go ahead and attack. For that you require more forces, but for defense you might not require that big a force. A brigade could be enough. Okay. So they urged that all the positions along Namka Chu river be held, even if an attack was not mounted anytime soon. Nehru, after giving the direction, he was going to Colombo, Colombo. So he was asked by the press about the orders given to the army in Nefa. See, this was a secret, top secret order. This was leaked to the press by some of the officials who attended the meeting. So Nehru, what he said was, this was what he said actually. Our instructions are to free our territory. I cannot fix a date. That is entirely for the army. He also pointed out that wintry conditions were already setting in. The PLA positions were numerically and tactically superior, and the main Chinese bases were located nearby. Nehru was in fact indicating that no action could be taken for the present. This was exactly what Nehru said. But the press publicized his comments as saying that the army had been asked to throw out the Chinese from Nefa. Okay, this was what the Indian press did. Nehru's purported remarks were seized by Beijing as proof of India's aggression. Okay, an editorial in the People's Daily said that a massive invasion of Chinese territory by Indian troops seems imminent. Kaul, of course, returned to his headquarters on 13th October. 2 days later, on 15th October, Prasad requested that 7th Brigade be withdrawn from his positions along Namka Chu. Okay. He was also backed by Kaul's own staff, the staff at the corps, that it was impossible to hold on to the post. Okay, so Kaul, listening to his subordinates, he sent a signal to army headquarters that the position at Namkachu was untenable. Okay, the army chief was rather agitated. He said India should do aggressive patrolling. This is what he said. But the same evening, Krishna Menon, Thapar, Malik and Sel, they flew to Kaur's headquarters. And he strongly argued that the Namkachu positions were untenable. Where he said very, very clearly. Okay, Krishna Menon, of course, responded that public opinion would not tolerate any further loss of territory. But the civilians left the room to let the military commanders confer among themselves and arrive at a decision. Okay. The generals, of course, they decided against any withdrawal. Thapar agreed to provide additional supplies, equipment and troops for the 4th Corps. Even as these discussions were underway, the PLA was given the operational order to liquidate the invading Indian army. On 18th October, the Central Military Committee met formally to approve the decision for a self-defensive counter-attack war, and the date was set for 20th October. The Indian troops on the other side of the river, they were in fact watching the PLA openly prepared for the attack. On the 19th October, the troops began to infiltrate Indian positions across Namkachu. At the crack of dawn, the onslaught commenced on the 20th October. In concert with the PLA's operations in Nefa, the PLA began an offensive in Ladakh. Here they sought systematically to eliminate Indian posts ahead of their claim line. The puny forward posts stood no chance and were rapidly wiped out. By 24th October, the Chinese effectively controlled the area up to their 1960 claim in northern and central Ladakh. In Nefa, they swiftly ran over India's position across the McMahon line. So Namkachu was simply wiped out. Whatever our portions, the Dola posts and everything, they were just wiped out. In 22nd December, both the army commander and chief were keen to defend Tawang, which was south. The Chinese army is coming down south. Okay, the divisional commanders was convinced that Tawang was untenable. Okay, so finally, the army headquarters had to agree that Tawang should be vacated, and the Indian government decided to evacuate Tawang and concentrate their forces further to the rear at Sela and Bomdila, further down. Okay. 2 days later, the PLA entered Tawang unopposed. There they passed and they began improving the lines of communication for the next phase. So the Indian army did not give any resistance to the Chinese onslaught. They simply disintegrated in Nefa. On 16th November, the PLA launched the second phase of its operations. While Indian forces put up a staunch resistance in Ladakh, those in Nefa ignominiously collapsed, virtually without any fight. By the evening of 19th, the 2 days after the war, the Indian army was helpless to withstand further onslaughts. In the west, the Chinese seemed likely to advance to Leh. In the east, the Bomdila, of course, Sela and Bomdila were lost, and they were poised to enter the plains of Assam. Now, Nehru approached the US for air cover. Writing to President Kennedy, he described the situation as really desperate and requested immediate dispatch of at least 12 squadrons of fighter aircraft. However, in the event, it was not American aircraft, but the unilateral declaration of ceasefire by the People's Republic of China that precluded further disaster. On 21st November, Beijing announced a unilateral ceasefire to be followed by the withdrawal of Chinese troops 20 kilometers to the north of the McMahon line, and the actual border they claimed in the Ladakh side. Okay, that is a situation that persists till today. There has been much speculation among scholars and analysts as to why the Chinese decided to declare a unilateral ceasefire on 21st November and then withdraw to his former positions behind the McMahon line. Some have suggested the American decision to interfere was a factor. Others thought that the Soviet Union had threatened to take action unless China halted their advances into the Indian territory. On the other hand, some of the Indian military analysts have pointed out that the winter was approaching the high Himalayas, making it impossible to maintain a long and vulnerable supply lines from forward bases in Tibet. But none of these explanations are consistent with the broader picture of China's overall policies and strategic ambitions at the time of the war. If you ask me, it was a limited action aimed at punishing India, in fact punishing Nehru, dethroning him from his leadership position in the non-aligned movement, and at forcing the Soviet to take sides in the wider conflict that had been raging in the international communist movement since 1960. This is a big ideological conflict, but that's beyond the scope of this lecture. Okay, China, in fact, there's nothing to indicate that China ever intended to hold on to territory that captured in October, November 1962. Okay, China wanted to demonstrate its military might and superiority, and by withdrawing, it had shown its goodwill towards its neighbors, demonstrating that it was not an aggressive power bent on capturing land from other countries. What is important is, the Indian army at every level performed below par and even unprofessionally at times. This is a fact. For example, take the 4th Indian Division. The 4th Indian Division was one of the legendary fighting forces of the Second World War. It fought in the Battle of Sidi Barani, and what is more, it participated in the Battle of El Alamein, which defeated Field Marshal Rommel. Okay. In 1962, it was commanded by General Niranjan Prasad and later General Pathania. Okay. But it lost so miserably. The 7th Brigade was destroyed completely at Namkachu, suffering the heaviest losses of any brigade in Indian Army's history. This we should not forget. His Brigadier Dalvi, the brigadier was J.P. Dalvi, was taken prisoner. 5 more brigades were brought to reinforce the division, but it simply disintegrated in the battles of Sela and Bomdila. The only place where it fought bravely was in Valong. Even there, they counterattacked, but the attack could not be sustained, and the Chinese were able to take Valong. See, much have been written about, paucity of automatic weapons. Yes, the army did not have automatic rifles, but they had other automatic weapons like machine guns and other guns of various kinds, And contrary to what was being told, they also had normal winter clothing. But for extra winter clothing, it had to be airdropped, and it must be remembered that most of the places were inaccessible. Okay, the only way supply could reach them was by dropping by parachutes. Okay, and there are no roads to speak of either in Nepal or in Ladakh. For instance, from Tawang to Namkachu, uh, the one had to march for 7 days. Okay, so the that the army was under Thapar and Kaul also does not explain the all down collapse. Oh, Timaya after all was was heading the army until October 1961. What must be remembered is that the Chinese captured thousands of our soldiers. We didn't manage to take even a single Chinese soldier as a prisoner. The Henderson Brooks report says this. I should read this. The the senior commanders once again let down the units. There is no doubt that headquarters 4th Infantry Division neither militarily prepared nor mentally adjusted to fight determinedly against the enemy. This is a report. It's a very strong report. Before contact, there was complacency bordering to negligence of elementary rules of security. Once the enemy threat was in close proximity, there was incoherent thinkings, incorrect statements, visual plugging of holes, and finally panic and flight. The name of the division, indeed that of the army, was destroyed on the 18th November 1962. Let us assume that the Indian army was given this my statement. Let us assume that the Indian army was given all that was demanded. Would it have won the war against China? The honest answer would be no. There would have been brilliant battles and heroisms and defenses, but ultimately the army would not have withstood the Chinese assault. The supply lines during those days were too thin. The army would have been starved of supplies within a fortnight or so. Some of the experts say that Indian Air Force should have been used to bomb the Chinese position, which would have turned the tide in India's favor. The fact is, the Chief of the Air Staff, ASPI engineer, went along with the assessment of the IB that it would invite massive retaliation and Indian cities, especially Calcutta, would be bombed. Okay, so the air, there are so many things. I don't want to go into. There are so many ifs and buts. It will be too long to continue this. Yeah, let me come to my final summary now. I think I am tired now. Let me come to my final summary. This is my final summary of 1962. The borders between India and China were never clearly demarcated. Each side had its version of the border. The major differences were in the eastern and western sector, McMahon Line and Aksai Chin. When China invaded Tibet, Patel wrote a letter to Nehru. In that letter, the most important point he made was this: a military and intelligence appreciation of the Chinese threat to India, both on the frontier and to the internal security. Nehru did not keep quiet. He appointed the Himmat Singh Ji committee to analyze the problems arising out of India's occupation of Tibet and submit a report. It was on the basis of this report that Assam Rifle was strengthened, new border posts were established along the McMahon Line. In the western sector, IB and Army set up posts, but not in Aksai Chin because it was uninhibited and almost inaccessible. What are the views of the army? Both Kariyappa and Timmaiah said very clearly that they could not take on China. Thus, Nehru had no other option except to pursue the goal by other means, which he did without any hesitation. I think India and China would have reached an agreement if Nehru had been a bit more courageous and imaginative. Okay, he could have the Chinese stand broadly was this: On the eastern side, they were prepared to accept the McMahon line as the border, but they wanted Aksai Chin badly because it was strategically important to them because of its closeness to the Xinjiang province. Pakistan too were claiming that the entire region was theirs and they were willing to forego any territory to slight China, to slight India. In fact, they did forego some territory to China. Thus, if you had skillfully negotiated, we could have got China to agree to accept India's stand on Kashmir. After all, in the 50s, Pakistan was staunchly anti-communist and was in the camp of America. This might sound foolish, but if Pakistan could get China to toe its line, in spite of the fact that US planes operating from US planes from Pakistani soil were regularly operating, India could also have won over China if it had been slightly flexible. The Nixon-Mao meet was more than 10 years later. China would have infinitely preferred India to Pakistan. One might say that China considered India a regional power and hence a rival. But China did settle its border disputes with Russia, a far bigger power and a far bigger rival. The only person who could have negotiated this without much acrimony inside India was Nehru. His prestige was high and his integrity unquestionable. He could have explained to the people the real situation India found itself to be in. The impossibility of the Indian army entering into a major war with the People's Liberation Army. The Indian people would have understood. Of course, the opposition parties would have made noise, and perhaps history would have called him, as a person who surrendered Indian territory. But that was the burden he should have been prepared to bear for India's sake. Nehru naively believed that China would never choose to wage a war, even a minor war, to tell us that they meant business. He was grievously wrong. So, the final question is, this is the final question everyone would ask is, so was Nehru responsible for the debacle of 1962? Yes, he was. Others too were responsible, but he was leading the country. India could have never won a war with China, but India could have averted a war through skillful negotiations. Yeah, Nehru died a broken man, Nehru's early death, I wouldn't call, in fact, it was more or less early death, He would have lived a few more years had 1962 not happened. See, there are two books I will recommend to anyone, to have a very good idea of what happened during those days. One is Srinath Raghavan's book on War and Peace in modern India. That's a very great book. It covers every war India faced after independence. The second book is written by another South Indian, Arjun Subramaniam's India's Wars. That tells you the wars. That, of course, they don't talk about strategy and all those things, and the political issue they don't talk about. The diplomatic issues the book doesn't talk about, but it gives you a complete story of how our wars were fought by our armed forces. These two books I would recommend to anyone. They are written in a very simple and easy to understand language.